Welcome to Veggie Farming. I'm Stacy, and today I'm excited to show you all the project that I've been working on this spring. As you can tell from the title, it's drip irrigation. I'm just really proud of myself for taking on this task, so I am excited to show you all the steps that I took. Now, I have a small garden, so I never thought hand watering was really a problem. I like being out in the garden. I like taking my time and looking around. But this last summer in Texas just let me know that I needed to find a better way. I was watering twice a day, usually early in the morning and then again in the evening after dark. And it was still pretty much close to 100 degrees. So there was never any real relief from the heat. And I was starting to just dread having to water the garden. So I knew I needed to find a better way. Now, last year I also put in the Oyas, and I can tell that they did work. I had less blossom end rot than I usually have because of inconsistent watering. And when I took them out in the winter, I could see that some of the roots had kind of started to attach to it. So I know that it does work, but I think that my beds are really deep, and I think they're better used in smaller containers. So this year I'm moving them to smaller containers, and I'm going to continue to use them. When I decided to take on this task for myself, I watched a lot of YouTube videos, and I decided to go with the company Drip Depot. When you go to their website, they have so many helpful videos on how to plan, and they show you what each fitting does, and they have a video to show you how to use it. And so after watching the videos, I was ready to get started. And the first thing I did was draw out my plans. And so let me show you what my rough draft drawing looks like. I also first started out with my connection. So I needed to get all the pieces that I was going to use to connect to my water spigot or hose bib. Let me take you over here and show you the connection I have at the hose bib. I have a 4-way splitter, and on one of the connections I have a swivel to direct my garden hose towards the garden. Then on the next section that I have the drip irrigation hook to, I have a couple of optional pieces, and the first optional piece is just an elbow to angle it away from the wall. The next piece is called a water hammer arrestor. That's optional. It just helps protect the pipes when the timer abruptly shuts off the water. The timer is also optional. The next pieces you will need are a backflow preventer or a vacuum breaker, a hose thread filter, and then a pressure regulator. Which kind you need will depend on whether you're using drip tape or drip tubing. I'm using drip tubing. And this next piece is a female hose thread adapter that will allow you to attach the poly tubing. And mine is the 1/2-inch poly tubing. I'll label all of the pieces so you can screenshot it if you need to. Now that I have my water connection set up, it's time for me to lay out the main line, and that's the 1/2-inch poly tubing. This area is right in front of my gate, so it's a high traffic area. So what I'm doing now is making a trench to lay out the tubing. It's to protect it from foot traffic and so that we can get in and out of the gate. This tubing does not have to be buried, which was something I didn't know when I started this project and was part of the reason that I was intimidated. I thought that I had to bury all of the tubing, but it has UV protection so it can lay above ground. Digging this trench right after rain made it much easier to do, and when the soil is back in place, it's not quite as noticeable. So let me show you the supplies I used to set everything up. We'll start with the main line tubing, and this is what it looks like. They come in, well, the ones I ordered came in 100-foot rolls, and this is 1/2-inch. And let me show you what I mean when I say that they can curve, but they can't turn. And so as you can see, it's already in a circle, so it can curve around things. But if you need it to turn, it will kink like that, and that will interrupt the water flow. So anytime you need to make a turn, you're going to use one of these pieces. So there's a T, and so with the T, you can make it keep going straight and branch off to another section. If you just need it to curve, you can just use the elbow. And then there's also a cross if you need it to go in two separate directions. So those are the main fittings that I use to make the main line tubing move exactly the way I wanted it to. Getting the tubing into this tall raised bed took 4 elbows to get it up and over and back down into the bed. And that way I could run the main line tubing all the way down to the end of this bed. Once I made it to the end of this bed with the tubing, I cut it and added a cap, and then used the T-fitting and a couple of elbows to continue routing it around the rest of the garden. I was hoping that stretching the tubing out like this would help it to lose some of that circular pattern that it was rolled in and make it easier to lay out in a line. Normally they recommend laying it out in the sun to help it straighten out, but I started this project on a pretty cloudy day, so my thought was to just stretch it out straight to help it lay out flatter. It did help some, but I think the sun would have worked better. One of the tricks I learned was to use hot water to help the fittings fit together a little more easily. So using hot water and wiggling it side to side helped them to fit together a little easier. Another thing I like about these fittings is that they screw to lock, so you get a little bit more security when you know that you've screwed it together as well. I'm just using the lawn staples to help the tubing stay in place. Before I cut the tubing, I'm going to take into account the height of the elbow. Or any fitting you're using, just remember it will add a little bit of extra length. What I'm doing right here is adding what's called a coupling valve, and that's going to allow me to shut the water off to this bed individually. So each coupling valve will allow you to control the watering in that specific bed. This is what the end cap looks like. It has a top and you can screw it off, and it allows you to flush out the tubing. You use this end cap wherever you come to a point with the tubing that you want the water flow to stop. Now, when it comes to branching off of the mainline tubing, there's also drip tubing. And this drip tubing has emitters every 6 inches. If you can see these little bumps, that's where the emitters are, and that's where the water comes out of. This tool is a hole punch tool. It allows you to place a hole in the mainline tubing, and then you use a barb connector to connect the drip line tubing to the main line. Once you insert the barb into the main line tubing, you'll hear a little click and you'll know it's in place. Based on the size of your beds, you determine how far apart you want the drip lines spaced. You can use lawn staples to keep your drip line in place, and then you'll trace it to the end and snip off the length that you need, and then to stop up that end, you'll use the fitting that's called a goof plug. And that just stops the flow of water right at the end of that tube. And when I set this up to go into the pots, you'll see that there's also this 1/4 inch. It's basically just like blank tubing, and it just acts as a connector to connect from the main line to the drip tubing, or either one of the emitters. Now when it comes to the pots, you just have to decide how you want the water to flow. You can use this same drip tubing, or you can use this type of emitter and you can turn it off and on and control the flow, or you can use this type of dripper emitter that drips at either like a half gallon, 1 gallon, or 2 gallon, and it just attaches to this stake and sits in your pot. So you just have to decide what kind of flow is best for your pots and your soil. You can see that this adjustable dripper lets out a lot more water than this button dripper that just lets out a slow, steady stream of water. So I'll decide which emitter I use based on what I have planted in that pot. For my trees, I'm going to use drip tubing. I have this T-barb connector, and I'll use this to make a circle at the bottom of the pot and use lawn staples to hold it down. Time for the final walkthrough, so I'm just checking each drip tube and emitter to make sure they're dripping like they should with the correct amount of pressure. As you can see, the final test of the whole system was a success. I hope watching me do this has inspired you to give it a try, and if it has, let me know. So thanks for watching. Happy growing.